Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, once again, we have someone from the Libertarian Party. We appreciate the Libertarian Party, all their energy, all their action. And his name is Josh Vergiels. So welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
Josh, if we could first get started by you kindly telling us which state you represent for the Libertarian Party and what particular office you're running for in that state.
Sure. So I'm a proud resident of the state of Indiana, and I am running for a state House of Representatives seat, so the state legislature.
Okay, perfect. So would you please also give us a brief background of yourself, a biographical sketch?
Sure. So my background is in engineering. I went to college here in Indiana. I'm actually from Ohio originally, but I came to Indiana for my education and got a background in mechanical engineering. And I found that I quite liked it here. And thankfully, after school, I was able to find a job here in Warsaw, Indiana, which is sort of a smaller, in terms of the nation, it's sort of a small city, but we punch above our weight because we have a very robust medical device industry based here. So I've been fortunate to build a very successful career working in the medical and technology sectors, usually in like R&D and front-end development. Initially in manufacturing, and then I've recently moved into more software and kind of mixed combination products.
Okay, that's good. So how has your career influenced your political views?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I started out doing more manufacturing engineering and process engineering, which for folks who aren't familiar, if you think of the show How It's Made, essentially that was my job, right? So somebody has a bright idea for a product and they might have designs and sketches, but they need somebody to help them manufacture it at scale and make sure that it's reliable and that it has adequate quality and things like that. So I did that for a number of years and got a lot of training on like 5S and Six Sigma and structured problem solving. And it really teaches you to look at problems in a specific light and very systematically. And you develop a distaste for waste and a real keen sense for rooting out the root causes of problems. And what I found, somewhat later in life, after I had been building my career for a few years, I kind of took an interest in politics. And really, the legislative framework for your country is no different there's sort of an analogy there, I guess, with the series of work instructions and procedures and other governing documents to govern a manufacturing facility. And what I found is that you'd often encounter points of struggle or items that people would bristle against because you had procedures that were poorly written or out of date that were basically compelling people to do things that didn't make common sense when you got to the level of the user. And anybody who's been operating in our country for any amount of time has encountered a very similar circumstance with our current legal framework, right? There's a lot of laws on the books that might have made sense to someone at some point, but when you get down to the actual implementation for the average person, they're confusing or frustrating or counterintuitive or even counterproductive.
Oh my. That's a good parallel between your engineering profession and your political endeavor. That's good.
Yeah, thank you.
So would you please tell us what's your libertarian vision? What are the main platform issues that you're bringing to this race?
Sure. Like many libertarians, I'm predominantly focused on two things, right? Freedom and sound economics. And for my initial, this will be my first opportunity to be in office potentially. And so rather than making a bunch of overly ambitious and grand pledges, I have three main policy priorities that are really focused around taking existing government programs or existing laws and making some modifications so that they are more effective and actually benefit the people who they're intended to benefit. If you'd like, I can give you kind of a brief summary of those, or if you want to keep it high level.
That'd be perfect.
Sure. So I mentioned freedom, right? So the first two issues I have are around educational freedom and what I'm calling freedom to age in place. But on the topic of educational freedom, So Indiana already has an existing voucher system. So people who meet a variety of very complex and rather stringent qualifications can get a small amount of money back from the state in order to offset the cost of private education. And of course, it can only be spent at certain institutions, and it's very much constrained. And I think we all saw during COVID, we had to get a lot more flexible and a lot more adaptive with our educational format. And we learned that there's a lot of students who thrive in perhaps a remote environment or a pod environment or even a homeschool environment. So my proposal is basically to take our existing voucher program and sort of take off the chains and make it a bit more accessible. So as a state, we spend, depends on your sources, but let's say $11,500 per student on public education. My proposal is that we carve off $2,500, and I can go to the state for state-funded schools regardless. But that other $9,000, I want to make available in the form of rebates to parents. So if they have a child who's not enrolled in public education and they want to pursue private school, or if they want to purchase homeschooling curriculum or materials or items like that, they can submit those expenses and basically be reimbursed for that cost up to $9,000.
Okay. Sounds good.
And so it's an existing program we already have, but it's basically you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to even qualify, and then even if you do, you can only spend it at places that have I'm sure there's a special interest element in there, but it's a very constrained set of places where you could even spend that money. So just trying to open that up a bit and make it more available for more people.
That's interesting you mentioned about the pandemic. I heard a lot of things the other way where people thought the pandemic made learning more difficult. So it's good to hear that it opened up opportunities for people.
Well, I think the folks who stayed with the public schools and tried to do it purely remote, it turned into oftentimes kind of a Zoom babysitting, and it wasn't well optimized for either the students or the teachers.
Okay.
But I've spoke to many, many constituents who, during that time, either their public school resources weren't available, or we have a lot of folks who, it's a rural, in many ways a rural district, so we have folks who didn't have adequate internet, so they took on more of a homeschooling posture, or they would do pod learning with, they'd build a group either through their church or through their neighborhood or whatnot. And a lot of folks said that their children really responded positively to that. So just trying to make resources available so that parents can sort of find the avenue that best matches up with their child's needs and to get them the education they deserve.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, homeschooling is underemphasized. It sounds like in your state as well as the whole nation. So that's good to have it advanced.
Yeah. From what I understand, it's on the rise, and obviously it doesn't make sense for everyone. So, we're not trying to prescribe or, dictate to people how they should live their lives. But if we can take money that they're already essentially being spent on their behalf on education and redirect that more efficiently, then I feel like that should benefit everyone involved.
Yes. So you talked about, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead if you had questions. I was going to jump to the next one.
Oh yeah, the next one. Yeah, I think I got my questions for this one, so that's good. So if you want to go to the next one, that would be great.
Sure. Next one, I'm calling it freedom to age in place, but basically another common item that I've had come up when I speak with constituents, we're a surprisingly popular retirement destination, and a lot of retired folks are on fixed incomes, either through Social Security or through whatever private savings they've lined up ahead of their retirement. And the last couple of years with rising inflation, cost of living, cost of groceries, things like that, these people are really getting hit hard, right? They already were on a shoestring budget, and now they've seen a lot of their costs, in some cases, double. And so now they're having to make difficult decisions about, do I spend my money on maintaining my property, maintaining my electricity or water, or do I spend my money on medication, or do I spend money on food? And concurrent with that, property values have been rising, so everyone's property taxes have been ramping up as well. So we already have an existing provision in Indiana state law that allows for deduction for property taxes for retired individuals.
Uh-huh.
However, much like our voucher program, it's got a number of hoops you have to jump through to even qualify. And then even if you do, it's a fairly modest reduction in your overall tax liability. And it's also a fixed amount. So as your property taxes ramp and as inflation grows, that fixed amount becomes less and less and less significant. And there's also ways that you can sort of game the system around that as the government to ensure that you still collect the revenue. So what I propose is instead we modify that tax credit and we essentially peg it to the median value of the home. And I'm open to the level of detail here. It might be at the township level. It might be at the county level. But basically, rather than having a fixed dollar amount discount, we have the county assessor perform an analysis of all the homes either in your county or in your township and say, okay, the median home value, let's say it's $300,000. Here's the property tax value that we would normally charge for a $300,000 valued home. If both residents of the home are over 65, they can apply for this rebate, which would essentially, as long as they have a median value home or lower, it would take their property taxes to zero. And now if you have if you're a very wealthy individual with a very fancy home, you will still have some property tax liability, but it will be reduced by that median amount. So
Okay.
the folks who are really struggling and need it most essentially get their property taxes eliminated. And the folks who have a high value property and presumably are a bit less negatively impacted will still have some tax liability, but it will be reduced. And I think there's a degree of, thank you to our senior citizens. You sort of earned a little bit of a break in your golden years.
Oh, sure. Sure. That sounds good. That's the time they need it the most because they be in the worst health and then all of them might not be able to work, so that sounds good.
Absolutely. More and more difficult to get money to come in, and it goes out the door faster and faster. And we've got a lot of folks who are really struggling, and they're really concerned about their ability to maintain ends meet. And a lot of these folks are still able-bodied, able to take care of themselves, but they're having to look at moving in with family or imposing on others just because they're not able to make their budgets working.
Oh no. That would be great to be able to change that.
Yep. And again, it's, nothing I'm proposing is revolutionary, right? These are all existing programs we have in place, but they're really more window dressing because they're so limited, and so ineffectual that it's rare that someone can actually access them. And even when they do, it doesn't have a significant impact.
All right. That sounds good.
So those two are freedom focused, and the other one is, I guess, a bit of freedom, but it's really more economics oriented. And I've sort of tongue in cheek named it my pothole program,
Oh.
which is, I guess, me being a little bit cheeky. But basically, we have a number of surprisingly high taxes here in Indiana. So we tax gasoline quite high. We tax vehicle registration quite high, and there's a couple other items that we tax rather inordinately. And we also are the only state, so I believe every state that we border with has legalized marijuana in some form or fashion. And if you look at the studies, we lose, it depends on who you ask and how you calculate it exactly, but it's on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars in lost state sales tax revenue from
Oh.
either citizens in this state driving out of state to purchase those products. And then additionally, there's a tremendous cost associated with our current posture of prosecuting and incarcerating individuals for low-level offenses for possession and things like that for marijuana products.
Yes.
So my proposal, it might sound a little radical to some folks, but basically it's an industry that we already know is very active in our state. I mean, I'm an hour south of our border with Michigan, and if I go 10 or 15 minutes north, I start seeing billboards for dispensaries in Michigan. So they wouldn't be advertising here in Indiana if we didn't have citizens going up there and purchasing products. So rather than forfeit all of that sales tax revenue to all of our neighboring states, I'd like to bring that home, and then that's a significant windfall for us from a budget standpoint, which would allow us to potentially offset and hopefully reduce the tax burden on other things that are a nuisance to people. I know most anyone I talk to says if they ever drive out of state, they always make sure to fill up before they cross the state line because our gas taxes are more comparable to California than they are to Ohio or Kentucky.
Hmm. Interesting.
And I know, like our vehicle registration taxes, so I purchased a new vehicle in 2023. Not anything crazy extravagant. You know, it's a nice car, but not a crazy nice car. And when when I renewed my registration for 2024, it cost me just shy of $800 to renew my plates that year.
Oh no.
Yeah.
So you believe you can do that much cheaper than $800, right?
Well, if we're going to have a positive windfall on the order of, let's say, $400 million of recaptured sales tax revenue, I feel like there's a way we can spread that across our population to reduce some of those excise tax and other burdens that we have.
Sure. Sure. Sounds good. It sounds like that's a trend that's happening nationwide, yet unfortunately it's not happening everywhere yet.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, I'm not some folks are really yeehaw pro cannabis and whatnot. I'm kind of indifferent myself on a personal standpoint. For me, it's just sort of a common sense economics thing, right? You know, every state and every legislature is constantly saying, oh, you know, we have all these demands on our budget and there's not enough money to go around and et cetera, et cetera. You know, we have an opportunity to make a significant positive impact on our balance sheet, and we don't have to build anything. We don't have to make massive investments that we hope will mature and pay off profits. We literally just have to essentially flip our general stance on a product from no to yes, and the infrastructure builds itself and it generates significant revenue for us all the while.
There you go. That's a good way of making a solution. When people want solutions, they often will say it's too hard to implement. So it's a good, I like how you're framing it to make it as something that's already there that you can get into place that's not too difficult. That's good.
Yep. So
So,
that's sort of my primary three positions. Obviously, there's other stuff that I'm interested in, whatnot, but it's hard to boil the ocean, especially on a 2-year term. So if I can make headway on hopefully all three, but even one of those, I'd be quite pleased.
yes, that would be good. So some of the people we interview don't mind talking about their opponents, and other people don't feel comfortable doing that. So if you're comfortable talking about your opponents, could you please tell us who you're facing and what they are like and what they represent?
Sure. So this time around, this is my second time running for this office. Last time and this time, I'm facing a Republican incumbent by the name of Craig Snow. He was previously representative of a different district, so he was not my representative before. And there's a long backstory there, and I guess I can go into that if you would like. But broadly speaking, he's sort of an establishment favorite, and given the circumstances around his election and continued presence, it's clear that he's going to maintain a establishment favorite.
Okay. Does the Democratic Party have anyone, or is he the only two-party person running?
So I was actually just double checking. To my knowledge, nobody from the Democrat side has filed yet, and I wanted to reconfirm. It doesn't look like they have anybody, and I believe the deadline has passed. So unless they can do some chicanery, I believe it's a 2-horse race for my position.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So, are you planning to do any debates or anything like that with him, or would he not be willing to do that, or would he be willing to do that?
Well, that's one of the interesting things about my opponent is this is the second time I've ran against him, and I've never actually met the man because he routinely declined to participate in any campaign events last election cycle, including we had a debate here in our county seat where both he and I live, which he was conveniently not able to attend, and I have yet to see him out at any of the public appearances that I've done or any of the community events that I've attended. So perhaps he would change his mind, but I suspect they might not even hold a debate because it's entirely probable that he would decline anyway.
Oh, sure, yeah. It sounds like he feels too comfortable in his position that he doesn't want to do anything.
We are a deep red district, so it is a difficult mountain to climb to upset one of the established candidates. But I can only hope that the other voters, I guess, would see what I've seen. And I don't know. My entire purpose in running initially was that I felt we deserved a better caliber of representation than we were getting, and I hope that the voters will agree with me.
Sure. Since you mentioned that you ran for office in a prior term, would you please tell us what you learned from running that office before and how you're implementing that in your campaign right now?
Ooh, that's a phenomenal question. It's honestly hard to simplify down to just a few things because my background, my family growing up was not particularly engaged politically. And this was that previous term, so in 2022 when I ran was my first foray into politics. And you want to talk about drinking through a fire hose. The amount of stuff that you don't realize goes into the process that you wouldn't think about, that you have to keep an eye on, it is staggering. So it was a massive learning curve. I think all things considered, we mounted a pretty good effort, given the amount of just logistics and other challenges we had to overcome. I'm fortunate this time around that I've saved a lot of time on a lot of those items. So even things as simple as trying to set up an avenue for voters to get in touch with you or a web presence, right? It can even be difficult, after, I believe it was 2020, Facebook started implementing stricter controls around politics. So even just setting up a campaign-specific Facebook page, more complex than you might think. And to try to do anything with sponsored ads or collecting donations or whatnot through there, there's actually a lot of identity and documentation information you have to put on there. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and it doesn't help that I was deplatformed off of Facebook in 2021, I believe, during sort of the COVID hysteria. One day I went to log on to my Facebook, and I was always sort of a milquetoast. I mean, I was very libertarian. I would like and comment on like being libertarian on other common libertarian party sites, but I didn't really post much, and I wouldn't really contribute a whole lot. But one day in 2021, I woke up to log into Facebook, and it just wouldn't let me log in, and it took a few weeks of kind of digging and trying to get in touch with customer support, which is surprisingly difficult, only to find out that basically my account had been banned without any real reason or explanation. And so now I have to rely on some of my campaign staff to help me set up and run my Facebook page for my campaign, right? So something you would think that would take half an hour on an afternoon to go and get that set up and get it running, and it actually became sort of a complex process and a problem to solve.
Oh no. So yeah, it sounds like they were overreaching for some reason. Maybe the algorithms are hypersensitive.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's I don't know. All I can think of is I very rarely posted stuff, but there was at that time the vaccines had rolled out sort of the first major deployment of the vaccines, and we were getting some preliminary data, some early studies, stuff that hadn't been verified or dug through, but sort of a step above anecdotal. And I recall posting a couple of those to a couple of kind of liberty-oriented groups. And I know in some cases those groups were shut down permanently, so I think maybe I was just sort of swept up in the dragnet, where they're just that page and anybody associated just got nuked, so to speak.
Okay. So other than Facebook, what is your campaign strategy for reaching the voters?
Well, so there's two elements to that, right? You sort of have, it's not quite the right, but let's say offense and defense, right? And by defense, I mean, you need to have an opportunity for incoming calls to come your way, right?
Yes.
And so that was kind of tricky to set up. Like it's, buying a web domain, building a website, setting up an email server, and all of that is rather complex and takes some time. And actually, one of the gems that I came across, I have a mentor on my campaign, Donald Rainwater, who's our governor candidate for the state of Indiana for the Libertarian
Oh,
Party. And he uses a company called Campaign Partner. And that was a huge win stumbling across them, is rather than buying a domain, which I'd already done, and setting up an email exchange server, which I'd already done, I was in the process of building out a website. So they have a service where for a relatively nominal fee, you can stand up a simple website, and it has built-in donation collecting tools, built-in information collection. So obviously donors, you have to record occupation info and their name and address and things like that. So that was a real cheat code, basically, to for a nominal fee, have a lot of that ready-made to service your campaign. So that was something that took me probably a month of sort of nights and weekends and reading up and scratching my head the first time around. And this time around, I was familiar with that service, so I popped in there, organized my account, and built out my simple web presence. And now, I'm probably not at the top of everyone's Google search results, but if somebody does go looking for me at votevergiels.com, they can read a little bit about my issues, they can donate to my campaign, they can volunteer to go door knocking with me and learn a little bit about me.
that's good. That's good. So what was the ballot access experience? Did your party already have ballot access, or did you have to collect signatures?
Sure. I'm very fortunate in that regard. Indiana Libertarian Party has maintained ballot access for a number of years now.
Okay.
For folks that don't know, Indiana's a little bit interesting. So a lot of people don't realize what goes into ballot access, and realistically, it's just sort of a tool that the major parties use to keep anybody else out of their sandbox. But in the state of Indiana, we base our party status for ballot access on the performance of a party's candidate in the Secretary of State election. So essentially the individual responsible for running our elections. And we've maintained, I believe I forget if it's a 3% or 5% floor you have to get in order to essentially have party status that allows you to have ballot access. So we've maintained that for a couple of decades now at this point. So I was very fortunate to not have to go through the process of collecting signatures and verification, because, I mean, that's, people don't understand, but that's, like Robert F. Kennedy, he's spending, tens of millions of dollars, I believe, trying to get on the ballot in all 50 states.
Yeah, that's it is. It's a major ordeal, to say the least.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you don't have to worry about that for your campaign. That's one thing. When we interview people, that's a big frustration that our alternative party candidates have to get through again and again. So whenever they don't have to deal with that, that's a plus.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're very fortunate. There's a lot of good things about Indiana. Anybody who's considering it should move here and find out.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So you mentioned earlier you have a team. Would you please describe what the team does for your campaign and how helpful they are?
Sure. We are a very lean operation, so the majority of the work is done by myself. I'm also very heavily involved in my county Libertarian Party affiliate, and our county chair also helps out with a lot of items for my campaign. And then I'm very fortunate enough to be blessed with a wonderful wife who is very gracious and supportive, and she'll often help me, especially like when I go out door knocking and things like that. She'll come along and it goes a lot quicker. Many hands makes for light work, right?
Oh, sure. So when you do the door knocking, what are some of the obstacles that you face in the door knocking, and how are you overcoming these obstacles?
A surprising one is just availability. And what I mean by that is obviously you want to be sensitive to, the voting populace are your customers, right? So you don't want to come at an inopportune time. So you kind of want to avoid lunch and dinner time. So your hours are somewhat limited to, let's say, like a weekend afternoon or a short stint for evening hours after work, which as the campaign season goes on, it gets darker sooner and sooner. And you don't necessarily want to be some random guy on somebody's front doorstep after dusk ringing the doorbell, right? Even if your intentions are perfectly wonderful, it doesn't put people in a good frame of mind to have a lighthearted discussion with you, right?
Sure.
So just finding time in a window that's convenient for your constituents. And then on top of that, what I just described is also the time when people are out, engaging in their own hobbies and living their own lives, right? So there's different times where you might go, you might go knock on, let's say 200 or 300 doors, and you might actually only have a conversation with 2 people during that whole
Wow.
time. And obviously we have literature that we leave so folks can read through that, but everyone has literature they leave, right? And 9 out of 10 times folks are just going to toss that because a little bit of print on a flyer doesn't mean anything. They're looking for somebody to engage them and actually hear their concerns and help put voice to the things that matter to them.
Sure. Do you have any tips for dealing with dogs on the campaign trail?
Typically not. So when we talk about training for door knocking, there's a few things, just sort of general safety items that we put out there. So, for example, we don't advise people to go out by themselves, right? It's always good to have a buddy system.
Sure.
If somebody has like a fenced-in yard where, maybe they have a fenced-in front yard and that fence goes out to the sidewalk, we advise people not to breach that, right? You hang the literature on the front of the fence and they can collect it if they need to. And if similarly, I've had a couple of spots where you might have a house where the front porch is in poor repair or it's overgrown or there's just generally safety concerns. And so, obviously we advise our volunteers and anybody who's door knocking to err on the side of caution. And if it looks like it's unsafe or perhaps unreasonable, then skip over that house and go on down to the next.
That sounds smart.
Mm-hmm. Another thing we do, this is something I didn't realize until I got into campaigning, and it's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but most of your high-ticket campaigns, your major parties and whatnot, they have a variety of software platforms they use where it's sort of like a Google Maps and it interfaces with voter registration information. And so then you'll go out door knocking and they'll say, okay, here's your region. It's set up for you to go door knock on. And we only need you to knock on, these doors. And so you end up passing over, you might only knock on 1 out of every 3 doors as you're going down because the other people, for whatever reason, aren't part of the targeted demographic. And that always really rubbed me the wrong way because even if they might not be registered voters or even if they might not be in your target demo, they're still constituents living in that district. They still deserve the same level of representation as the voters you're targeting. So, last time around I had sort of a tagline. I called it Operation Every Single Door, and it's something I've carried through this year as well. And I make it a point, whenever I'm out door knocking, obviously barring safety issues or concerns like that, but I make it a point to stop at every single door, not just the ones that are flagged as, libertarian favorable or registered or what have you, because I feel like we owe it to all of our constituents, to try to have their voice heard.
Oh, sure. Sure, that sounds like a good approach. It sounds like you're willing to engage with all the voters, whether they are predisposed to support you or not.
Well, the tricky thing about being a third party, if I only engage with the folks who already vote for us, we're not going to win, right? So we got to go out and talk to everybody.
There you go. So given that, and how do you handle people's objections? What are some strategies for that?
I find that a lot of what I do is more education than argumentation.
Okay,
And what
great.
I mean by that is a lot of folks are apprehensive about third parties because either they just don't know, and obviously people fear the unknown is a common phrase. I don't know if they fear us, but they're not keen to support us because they don't know anything about us, or they have a misunderstanding of us. So, and it's interesting because you can tell the propaganda from both parties, right? Because if I go and speak with a voter who's predominantly Republican, they say, "Oh, libertarians, aren't you guys just a bunch of crazy liberals and a bunch of hippies and stuff like that?" And then when I go to talk to more Democrat-leaning voters, they say, "Oh, libertarians, you're those crazy gun nut conservative type people and whatnot." So it's kind of funny how we can be the boogeyman to both sides, and the truth is nothing but, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But more often than not, I just talk to people and I say, they might have a negative opinion. And I say, well, try me. What are some things that concern you? And what I find almost universally is that when they start talking about the items that concern them, it's the exact same things that concern me, and it's many of times it overlaps with some of the core elements of my campaign. So I would say not always. There's the occasional one that sort of stays sour, but the vast majority, by the time you get done talking with them, they might not be fully convinced. They might want to go do their homework or look into things more, but they seem to have a lot more positive sense of what we're about and a lot more curious and interested about the Libertarian Party platform and about myself as a candidate.
All right. That sounds like a good approach you have then.
I try to. I mean, most people, if you sit down and talk to them and are open-minded, most people are reasonable, and if you boil it down, most people are concerned about the same things, right? They want to make a good life for themselves and their family. They want to be safe. They want to have a promising future, financially, and it's hard not to come together when everybody wants the same thing, especially if I've spent a lot of time learning about politics and getting acquainted with a lot of the propaganda and fear-mongering that they use to sort of keep us, the major parties, it's almost like an abusive spouse situation, right? They tell you that nobody else will love you but them, and if you ever leave them, horrible things will happen, and sometimes folks just need to see that there's an open mind and a helping hand on the outside to open their mind to new options.
Sounds good. So, Josh, how can our audience support you in your campaign?
Well, I hate to say it, but money is what funds campaigns. So, obviously, if folks are interested, we'd love to have them donate. Again, if you go to votevergiels.com, there's an avenue right there to donate to my campaign. Oh, sorry, I've got an interruption here. There we go. So obviously donating is great. My personal preference, I'm a big fan of donating time rather than money to the charities and causes I support. If you're local and in the area, we'd love to have you volunteer to come out with us door knocking. There's also, if that makes you nervous, we have a lot of community events that we'll go and table. So you can just hang out at a table with us and just be available to have conversations with voters. And then if you're not local and still want to volunteer, we could always use folks to place phone calls and do other stuff like that to help spread the word.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Josh, thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your campaign. We appreciate hearing about what you're trying to do to make your district a better place.
I appreciate the opportunity. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
I wish you all the best in your campaign and everything else you do in your personal and professional life.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate that.
All right, take care and all the best.